Hey, listeners, you may have heard that we're putting on a super cool new writing challenge in January, complete with a space and a place to join up with other writers to try to write every day or as much as you can.
That's right. It is JanYourStory. It is coming soon. In short, JanYourStory is a challenge to write 500 words every day in January. Importantly, it's free. You're invited to write with hundreds of other writers to start your 2026 with a writing streak. And then you can keep that streak going all year by being in our community, in the Memoir Nation community, and seeing what we have in store for you for the rest of the year. Grant, I know I just said that it's free, but what are some of the other important things?
Let's repeat that.
Yeah, let's repeat it for sure. What should people know?
It's free.
Yes.
It's low pressure. It's part of Memoir Nation, but you do not have to be writing memoir to participate. JanYourStory is about writing, celebrating writing, getting writing done in January, creating momentum for the year. And if you complete the challenge, you'll have written 15,000 words in just a month, which is such a motivating way to begin the year.
It really is. So join us and hundreds of other writers. Go to memoirnation.com, check out the community button at the top menu area, sign up for your account. Once you're inside the community, navigate your way right over to JanYourStory and you will see what it's all about. And we would love to see many of you there. Hello, starters, rever-uppers, restarters, and false starters too. Welcome to Memoir Nation and this special episode that is dedicated to starting and getting started and restarting. I'm Brooke Warner, here as we approach the end of this challenging year with my co-host Grant Faulkner. And Grant, it is the end of the year, but we are talking about beginnings because you and I are very trained on this memoir writing event that we have coming up in January called JanYourStory. And we've got a lot of people signed up and signing up for it every day. And so I'm super excited and it's looking like it's going to be a pretty robust event. And so we're ending the year with some thoughts on where and how to start or restart, which is what we're doing this week. And then next week, we're going to talk about how to keep going. So Grant, what makes starts so difficult?
They are so difficult for a lot of people. I've heard so many stories. And I think starting a new writing project, it's hard because for one, we have to confront ourselves, and, the beginning of writing a story asks us to step into webs of uncertainty before we've built any momentum or meaning or even sense of direction for the story. And when you begin, you're standing at the blankest moment of all, of course, literally a blank page. So the work, it hasn't shown you the path. The story hasn't opened itself up. But I think it can also be a really crowded moment at the beginning, especially with memoirs, perhaps, because you might be thinking of 10 or 20 possible beginnings, and it seems like they're crying out to you and jostling about, and it's just hard to know which of those possible beginnings to follow because, you're not following any trajectory to begin with yet, so it's scary. And it's like traveling without a map, essentially. You don't have a rhythm or a direction yet, so it's easy to question yourself or start overthinking something. And a new project also asks us to let go of the fantasy of the finished work. In our minds, I think most of our story ideas are really perfect before we write them. They're clean and they're whole and they're wonderfully written. On the page, though, your words can trip over themselves like a clumsy teenage kid growing into their body. And that gap can feel really discouraging and even embarrassing because you have to face what might appear to be your own inadequacies, but they're not, trust me. So, we can delay at the beginning, not because we don't want to write, but because we don't want to witness the imperfect first draft of something we care about. And I oftentimes tell writers this Joyce Carol Oates quote, and I think about it for myself. She says, "You don't know the first sentence until you've written the last sentence." And that means that the beginning, for me at least, the beginning is likely to change in some ways, sometimes super dramatic ways. So, my advice is just don't stress too much. Just dive in and get going. And there's also the simple fact also that you are starting this huge project. A book is a huge project, so it requires commitment. And the moment you begin, you're choosing to write this book over everything else you might write or might avoid writing. So beginning is this act of faith. You're saying, I don't know where this is going, but I'm willing to walk with it for a while, maybe just because you have to. So in short, I think you have to give up on being, this kind of supremely confident writer and just give yourself permission to get messy and permission to try on different beginnings, because you just have to pick one, and you might pick another one in revision when you know your story better. And I think that's actually kind of a good metaphor for a beginning. You're meeting a new friend, which is your book, and you're going to do things together to get to know each other. And the more you know each other, the more your friendship is going to change forms and deepen to the extent that it will have many beginnings.
Yeah, I love that reminder that writing doesn't start with confidence. And some people never harness confidence in their writing process. I think it's important to say that and to know that, because you're not a bad writer. There's nothing wrong with you if you feel less than confident about your writing. Some people just wrestle with that for their entire writing lives. And, I've just seen it. It's all about getting up on a given writing day and doing the work. Writing begets writing, as they say. And I know it's true because I've experienced it first and secondhand. And so, Grant, I'm curious if you could share any personal experience of starts. How do you get started when you have a new book project?
I'm finding that I'm a really bad guide and teacher these days, because I so often just answer that it's my intuition, But I think there's something to that, because when I start writing, I really do feel the story somehow, maybe not in actual words, but I just go with the flow of whatever image or moment is speaking to me. And then I go from there. And the start, of course, is important because it sets the trajectory and the shape of the story. So you'd think I'd think it through more, but I just don't want to overthink the story at the start. And perhaps a better way to put it is that I like to write toward the questions rather than the answers. So I start at a place that opens up the questions, and opens up the quest of the story, so to speak. And maybe that's how a friendship begins too, just to go back to that metaphor, is I meet this new person or book, and I have a lot of questions for them because I want to know their story. So now, Brooke, I'm going to question within question for you, because I'd like to know about any personal tricks you have for starting. But I also want to ask you about how to start more generally. I know in the memoir classes you teach that how to start is one of the modules you have. So lay it on us.
Well, I'm Brooke Warner. I'm a planner. So when I was listening to you, I'm like, I think we might have sort of different approaches. I mean, it's not that I don't have the questions, but I really like to map it out and have a container, kind of like a roadmap, so that I do know where I'm pointing toward. That said, you've really spent a lot of your life in fiction, and I've spent a lot of my life in like very prescriptive nonfiction. So I think it is a different process, and the memoir by extension is challenging me to not be quite so planny. I have historically always sketched out what I'm going to do, like in a physical journal or notebook. I like to use pencil so that I can erase things. For my memoir, when I started, I did start with a timeline, and I did think that was essential, mainly to piece together what I couldn't remember. And in some cases, I had to do some research and look back at photos in my phone and old emails. And that did help me to have that container that I was looking for, just to add things to my memory and to help me corroborate certain events. And I think that's helpful for a lot of memoirists. So I think that's a good place to start for those of you wondering, like, okay, where do I even, put my energy at this point if you're starting something new? In terms of where to start your actual memoir, when you start to write, there are lots of ways to start, of course. I do have 5, buckets that I can go through here real quick. And these are not comprehensive. I mean, just because I'm about to say these things doesn't mean if you're like, oh, that's not where I started, that there's anything wrong with that. Because, of course, you can start wherever you want. But if you're stuck and you're just like, what should I do? Here are some ideas. And, these also might change later. Number 1 would be an inciting event or an inciting incident, something that happens that is kind of explosive or a big deal that really kicks off the memoir with a punch. And people do that a lot because it's gripping. It's something that is like, ooh, this is going to be exciting. I'm thinking of Cheryl Strayed in Wild. Famously, she started with this prologue where she loses her shoe or like throws her shoe over the mountain. That's an inciting incident that is like, oh my gosh, I really want to read that. Can't wait to see more. Number two would be a scene, and it would be a scene specifically meant to set up something specific, and so a lot of times this is about a character-driven memoir. You're trying to show how things are with your characters, and so this is when something is about a dynamic that you want to show. So a lot of times if people have, like a mother-daughter story, for instance, you'll see that it opens with something that is meant to set that kind of tone and kind of focus on character. Number three would be painting a picture. And so this would be like a setting driven way to start. And if you have something that, is particularly about a place, or, it takes place in a college setting, for instance, or it takes place in a town where the town is really the character, then that's something to think about, because you might want to set up what things were like when you were young, growing up in Ohio or Florida or wherever you're from. Number four, a scene that introduces your themes. And so this would be kind of like a more subject or meaning driven setup. And so you could open up with like speculation or takeaway for the reader, kind of big, broad strokes, trying to get people interested in what your themes are. And then finally, the fifth bucket that I have is something that shows how things were before they changed. And the purpose here would be to set the context. Like I was in love with this person because this is how this person was, but then the inciting incident would come a little later and everything changes. And so you want to do that, of course, if you're showing something like a divorce memoir, because you do want the reader to understand, why did you fall in love with that person in the first place? So those are just some examples. But Grant, let's toggle over to starting to write, because there's what you put on the page, and then there's like the actual going about doing it. And that's what I want to ask you about. So what would you say to someone who's like us lately and has been confessing to underwatering their memoir, but they're going to get started or restarted in January, and then they're going to wake up on January 1st. And so what would be a recommended approach?
Well, first of all, I think back up to December 31st and print out the list of 5 things you just said and think about your beginning. I really like that list. That helps me a lot. But I've started to love rituals, because rituals are a type of invitation, and they're actually kind of fun. And since I wake up, really early to a very dark house, a very dark, quiet house, I've started to light a candle in the morning just before I write. And then I write in my journal for just 5 or so minutes, very casually. I just try to remember anything interesting from the day before, a line of dialogue, a taste, an interaction, a frustration. So it becomes a kind of slow creative warm-up with no pressure of writing well or writing anything for any other purpose than to write it. And, just like I was finding that when I would just open up my laptop and there my memoir would be, and it wouldn't be like such an invitation. I'd feel resistance in myself. So I need to make that morning more of an invitation. And also, in moments when you are kind of thinking through a scene, staring into a candle flame is a pretty great way to think. So I actually think you can think about writing as, similar to getting ready to exercise, stretch a bit, get your mind and body ready to go, and have your favorite caffeinated beverage nearby, of course. I'm a big believer in the intermixings of caffeine and creativity. And I think often of Stephen King, because he believed that having a routine is a creative act, because your mind is actually stimulated by the time and place and manner that you write regularly. So your favorite pen actually is a type of magical pen, because it's speaking to your brain in its way. It's saying, now it's time to turn off everything and go into your story world. So, Brooke, today's show is about starting, and it's important to note that restarting is really the same thing, the same vibe. But restarting can feel more fraught for a lot of people, because they've started something and put it down, and maybe they've done this many times over, and they might feel a bit nervous about starting. I'm speaking from personal experience here. Like they're going to betray their project, or their project is going to betray them, or they're just overwhelmed by starting again. So how should writers who are restarting thinking about approaching their restart?
Yeah, it's important. I think one way is off the computer. I do think it's good to print out the work that you have so far or write longhand in your journal about re-entering. I was saying earlier, like a journal or a notebook. I actually just have like a spiral bound notebook that works for me because I'm not particularly precious about it. Like I like it to be something that I can really engage with, that is bigger than, these kind of small notebooks that sometimes you'll see. A good gift for the writers in your life, by the way, if you're still trying to shop for holiday presents here at the last minute. And I've seen writers I work with get very, very creative off the page with whiteboards, cork boards. Some of my clients have even used closet mirrors and sticky notes, or writing on stuff with erasable marker. And so it is like engaging your creativity, I think, to sketch big, sometimes to see things in color. In the human brain is so dynamic, and so engaging with tactile stuff, markers, colored pencils, sticky notes, butcher paper, images, all of that is just a great exercise for restarters because it can get you out of your funk if you happen to be one. I think sometimes people, like you said, they're just sort of like in a space of dread because they're re-entering something that they gave up. And so you really want to get back into that creative and expansive place to meet yourself there. And I'm sure many people know that Salika Jawad has a new book out right now. It's called The Book of Alchemy. And it's actually kind of a celebration of journaling. And she writes about journaling as a creative action. This is something we know to be true, of course, but it's such a good reminder, like how writing becomes the practice. And then that opens the door to creativity. And so she, in this book too, is talking about the value of pen to the page. Some memoirists are lifelong journalers, but many, many are not. So this can be a new practice for you. And it doesn't really have to be about like, what did you do today? That's not the point. It's really trying to engage with your thoughts, your memories, and just seeing where things take you. And it actually reminds me of what you were saying earlier, Grant, about just being open to the questions and asking questions, answering questions. And I think number two, if that was number one, number two is, like not being so goal oriented or so outcome driven in the creative process, because that is why people stop or don't finish in my experience. So I don't know. What else, Grant? Other thoughts for our restarters?
Yeah, I'd read Salika Jawad's Book of Alchemy. I think that's a great book. I'm glad you referenced it. And I agree with you that our goals can strangely shoot our starts in the foot because they just can feel so heavy and onerous. So I'll riff on what you said and just say, let's pause and celebrate beginners and re-beginners. I always say, I wish I could return to the kid I was growing up, because I remember I'd just get an idea for a story. I'd drop everything and I'd write it just for fun. And I think we should remember our beginners' minds and write just for the joy of it, to discover meaning and to entertain ourselves and discover the world and who we are, and just hold things lightly, and by holding things lightly, I think we open up not only our start, but we create momentum for the rest of the project.
Yeah, I was thinking about just last week when we were interviewed by Sari Botten, and she shared that it took her 15 years to finish her memoir. I was grateful that she brought us on to Memoir Land to talk about Memoir Nation and JanYourStory, but I appreciated that she brought that up because, I often hear that 10 years, 15 years to complete a memoir. And that's because most, if not all, memoirists have these starts and stops. It's not that people are continuously working on their memoirs for a decade plus. They go away from it, they come back, and they come back because the gravitational pull to their story is so strong. And so this January, Grant, I am a restarter and I'm feeling good about it, but I also feel this sense of like reluctance. There's part of me that feels like, ugh, why am I choosing to do this to myself in the first place? And it made me think about Mary Karr, who famously said that writing a memoir is like punching yourself in the face. But we come back to it despite the punching ourselves in the face because largely because we have to. Like, it is a draw that is so strong. And then once you decide to do it, you kind of have to do it, even if that means putting it down and picking it back up and putting it down and picking it back up. So some of you who are listening to this are undoubtedly also restarters. And it really does just take a day that you choose to do it again, where you grab your pen and paper or go to your computer and then you start to write. And I think a good number of words to aim for that first day is 500, don't you, Grant?
500 is a great number. And when you write 500, I don't think you feel like you're punching yourself in the face so much.
Thank God.
That's our new tagline, right? Welcome to Memoir Nation. Punch yourself in the face. Just so listeners know, we were very deliberate about choosing 500, and I think it's good because it's a manageable number. And it's also good because it's enough words to get in a flow. So I think the goal of writing 500 words will often lead to writing another 500 words. Also, I think a lot of people see the expanse of the whole book in front of them, and it can just feel so daunting. But, writing a book is incremental. There are no shortcuts. It just takes the time it takes, and you have to put in the work. And in a lot of ways, I think this is what draws people to do the work because it's rewarding. It's a process of self-discovery that's probably as scary and maddening at times as it is gratifying and essential. So listeners, writers, essayists, memoirists, personal writers, legacy writers, whatever kind of writing you're doing or want to do or might do, come do it with us. We're just weeks away. No, we're less than weeks away, right? We're on the precipice of JanYourStory, and we've got some structure for you over at Memoir Nation. We're going to be a whole group of starters and restarters, and we'd love for you to be starting or restarting or both with us. So, Brooke, are you doing any preparation for starting?
I actually am. I am taking these weeks, these precipice weeks over the holiday to simply read what I already have, which is about 30,000 words, which is not nothing. And I have these pages printed out. I am going to take notes in the margins. I'm going to use color to engage my brain beyond the computer. And I will just have, all of this in my head as I start to rewrite again in January. And it's just a way for me to commit to restarting my journey, from the get-go with some fuel in the tank, I guess. And like Grant said, everybody, we'd love for you to join us and come see what it's all about. Get words on the page, make 2026 a year of writing, a year of contemplation, capturing ideas and lived experiences. That is what it's all about. And it is such worthwhile stuff, despite the punching yourself in the face part. It helps us to find meaning and make meaning. And honestly, I think that's a real solve during tough times. So thanks, everyone. Happy holidays. Hanukkah is just coming to an end this week. So we hope that anyone who is celebrating was able to find some peace during what has just been a brutally challenging year for the Jewish community. We send you our love. We are sending Christmas wishes this week to all of our revelers, joyous Kwanzaa to those of you who are celebrating, and also cheer to those of you who don't celebrate anything, because some of us just want to get to the end of the year, and I get that. We're almost there. Though before we get there, we will have one more week of episode show next week for how to keep going.
How to keep going through Christmas to JanYourStory and beyond. Happy holidays, everybody.